Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to 2021. What a momentous day we had yesterday. And certainly we hope our friends, colleagues, and elected representatives are all doing well and fine and recovered from the great events of yesterday. Um, and I hope you all had an amazing new year and are feeling as refreshed and revived as I am to say goodbye to 2020 and hello to a very different year and time, let us hope. A couple quick updates from me before introducing today's panelists. We have a talk next week, of course, with the one and only Valerie Plame, and she will be interviewing another former CIA operations officer, Joe Whipple. Joe has spent a long career overseas in various different CIA postings, and he is now a professor of international relations at Boston University. We are about to announce two new talks, one on January 21st, which is also a Thursday at 10 a.m. And on that day, we will be featuring a look at the sonic attacks on US diplomacy or US diplomats in Cuba and in China. And we have a really interesting cast of characters who are going to join us that day. We'll, of course, feature our very favorite Ambassador Vicki Huddleston in that conversation, and she'll be talking with two gentlemen. One is, I have to read my notes here to pronounce the names correctly. One is just down the road in Albuquerque. His name is Idil Shamiloglu, who's a professor at UNM and has done significant work in the engineering field on how sonic attacks actually work and what actually happened from a scientific perspective. A CIR member alerted me to Idil in an article he had just published, and this talk all came together. And when I asked Idil, well, who else should we have on this talk? He said, well, how about James Giordano? James Giordano is the chief of the Neuroethics Studies program at Georgetown University Medical Center. And really importantly, he was commissioned by the State Department to be the very first neuroscientist to perform forensics on the US diplomats sickened in Cuba. Among other things, he now serves as a senior fellow in biotechnology, biosecurity, and ethics at the US Naval War College. And he's a super interesting guy as well. So that's going to be on the 21st. All details will be on our website soon enough. And then on the 28th of January, we'll feature Todd Greentree talking all about foreign policy in the Biden administration and what some of the amazing challenges and opportunities lie in front of our incoming administration. So let me now say good morning to our three panelists. Good morning, everybody. We're thrilled to have you join us here. Let me start by introducing first Dr. Ephraim Isaac. Welcome, Ephraim. We're thrilled to have you here. And Ephraim is a scholar of ancient Semitic languages and civilization in African Europe, Ethiopian Languages and Religions. He's the director of the Institute of Semitic Studies and chair of the Ethiopian Peace and Development Center. He holds a divinity degree from Harvard and has received worldwide recognition for his great efforts to resolve conflicts in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us this morning. Welcome. Then we also have Nanny Deddy joining us once again. Hi, Nanny. And Nanny, many of you may well have already met and remembered because, of course, she was a long-serving CIR intern. She was our college student of the year a couple of years ago. She is a graduate of St. John's College, and she's currently an intern for the Africa program at the Center for International Policy based in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Nanny. And last and definitely not least, we have Ambassador Vicki Huddleston, who led 4 US diplomatic missions overseas in Cuba, Mali, Madagascar, and Ethiopia. And Vicki, let me turn everything over to you. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm delighted to be here, especially since this is the first in my, hopefully, series of talks with well-known experts around the world. And because of the events yesterday at our Capitol when it was assaulted, I thought what I might do with this series of lectures is dedicate it to the idea of preservation of democracy. If there's one thing we learned from this assault is that no democracy, no matter how old, whether it's several centuries like the United States, is immune from assaults on democracy. That it takes care and it takes maintenance. And what worries me now is that maybe the 20th century, 21st century, 20th century will be the liberal century, and 21st century will be the illiberal century. So we'll learn about that in these lectures. And it begins with Professor Ephraim Isaac, who has talked about peace, who has engaged in efforts to promote peace and development and negotiations around the world. It's wonderful to have him on the program. For me, he is an old friend. We were both involved in trying to save Ethiopia's imperfect democracy in 2006. And now, once again, Ethiopia's democracy is threatened with internal dissent and also possibly by its neighbors. So what we're going to do today, and we have Nanny Deti joining us because Nanny's an Ethiopian as well as Professor Isaiah, is talk to the professor about just how did all this come about, that this Nobel Peace Prize winner, Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, should find himself in a situation in which he is using his military against one region of the country, and that ethnic difficulties have spread throughout the country. So how I'd like to do this is let's first talk about ancient Ethiopia. It is such an amazing country. So we're going to talk about that first. Then we'll move on to Emperor Haile Selassie, and then the communist Derg, and the rule of mainly Meles, but it was called the EPRDF, which overthrew the Derg. But a lot of the conflict today comes from the rule of the EPRDF, which had overthrown the communist Derg and brought a semblance of democracy to Ethiopia, a country that had a 2,000-year-old empire, the last emperor of which was Haile Selassie. So enough from me. Again, wonderful to see you all. So glad you're here. Let me turn to Professor Isaacs to ask him to describe for us the empire, the Solomonic dynasty, and the divisions, or maybe there weren't that many, between Muslims and Christian, because it was begun, Ethiopia, as a Christian empire, and how these factors in the past may have affected Ethiopia in the present. So over to you, Ephraim.
Thank you so very much, Ambassador Vicki. I'm really very honored to be interviewed by you. As you said, we work together to rescue democracy in Ethiopia in the last century, and I'm very happy to see you here. Yes, I'm always very proud of ancient civilizations, and I'm very proud of the ancient history of Ethiopia. Ethiopia, of course, is called the home of Lucy, the mother of all of us. It's also regarded to be the home of the Afro-Asiatic languages. Afro-Asiatic languages include ancient Egyptian, Cushitic languages of Ethiopia like Oromo, Semitic languages, and many others. And Ethiopia is supposed to be the home of these ancient languages. In short, it's a country that has a long history and respectable culture, respectable history. I was just looking at Rudolphus Hiob's book written about 400-500 years ago called Ethiopian History, the first European to write a history of Ethiopia, in which he quotes an Ethiopian monk there who says, "I come from Ethiopia, a land of peace and love." a land of peace and love, a land of truth, a land where people love each other and work together. I'm really impressed that 400 years ago, and not only Rudolphus, there was another writer by the name of Damiao de Goes, a student of Erasmus, a disciple of who wrote a book called Fides Religio Moresque Ethiopia. The religion, the faith, and the culture of the Ethiopian people. He wrote it in Latin, in which he also describes Ethiopia as a tolerant country where Christians, Muslims, and Jews all live together. In fact, the book was put on the index by the Catholic Church because the book was written to criticize the Catholic Church by way of saying, why can't we in Europe live together like the Ethiopians, who are people of different cultures, religions, and languages, and they live together in peace. So I'm very proud of that. I'd like to have that book translated into the Amharic language. And then in more recent days, of course, as you quite well know, Ethiopia was known as a symbol of the freedom for all of Africa. African Americans themselves looked at Ethiopia as a very important symbol. Last year, I was honored to be the guest at the annual meeting of the Black Congressional Caucus, in fact, on which they wanted me to speak specifically about this subject, how going back to the 19th century, many African-American writers had written very much about Ethiopia. The first African-American church was called the Ethiopian Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. They called it Ethiopian Baptist Church. And the book written about history of Ethiopia in 1815 by one of the first African-American writers also describes Ethiopia as a land of tolerance, of ancient culture, and why can't African-Americans follow their example? So I was very proud to have been the speaker where I described the role, what we call Ethiopianism, played in fact, in the fighting for independence in Africa. Ethiopianism is the symbolism of Ethiopia as an ancient country, as a country of free people, as a country who have a very proud culture, and Africans and African Americans themselves have looked at Ethiopia as their flag of freedom, of justice, of truth. So I don't know, maybe what else you wanted me to say about the history. I can talk about. This is, of course, something that is like a year's course.
Exactly. But here we have an empire, um, and the empire is known for its tolerance. It's not a democracy, but yet it's known for its tolerance. Has that changed now? Is Ethiopia, as it becomes a democracy, becoming increasingly intolerant?
Well, let me also, by the way, congratulate you on your words about what happened yesterday in the United States. I called it myself the birth pang of the new rebirth of American democracy. We went through the birth pang of a new rebirth of American democracy. Well, apropos your question, this is regarding, could you just repeat the keyword there that you gave me?
Yeah, well, this whole issue of democracy, when I was in Ethiopia, the Ethiopians would say to me, "Oh, well, your democracy is so well established, you don't have to worry."
Well,
Clearly, we have to worry. And the question was really, Ethiopia seems to have been more tolerant of different ethnicities and religions when it was an empire, when it was not democratic.
well, it is true that actually, as I said already, Ethiopia was regarded, even by Tessiger, who also traveled in Ethiopia in the 19th century, and many other travelers. Sylvia Pankhurst wrote a book called History, Culture of Ethiopia, in which she said, why don't we in Europe follow Ethiopia, where women have equal rights? It's amazing that when she died, Sylvia Pankhurst, Professor Pankhurst's mother, she preferred to be buried in Ethiopia. What I'm saying is that it is true that the traditional culture of Ethiopia, whether it's a Christian, the Muslim, or the Oromo tradition also, is a very interesting, almost really in some ways I can call it democratic in terms of religion, tolerant, And this is, of course, an idea that even Homer and the others in ancient Greek referred to Ethiopia as the land of tolerant, hospitable people. What has happened, however, is even today, I would say 95% of the people of Ethiopia, whether they're Amharas or Oromos or Tigrays or Gurages or Walaitas, they are really an amazing, respectful, kind people who will entertain you if you go to the village. If you came, they will wash your feet because they think you've been traveling too fast, and they will give them their own bed and so on. The problem that developed is in the last 50 years, about 10 to 15% of the Ethiopian people have been educated abroad. They've been exposed to Marxism, to Leninism, they studied Hobbes, who says homo homini lupus, man is wolf to man. And indeed, one Ethiopian who was educated in Europe, when he came back and met the Minister of Education maybe about 40 years ago, and the Minister of Education said, now, how are you doing? He said, I have changed. You, Minister of Education, have not changed. You're still an Ethiopian. I have been in Europe now. He said, I'm a different person. I'm no longer Ethiopian. It's very interesting. This is a very interesting statement. What I'm trying to say is that these 5 to, let's say, 10% of our Ethiopian people who've been exposed to the study of Marxism, Leninism. I remember in the early 60s, actually, the founders of modern Ethiopian politics were at Brandeis University, 4 students. They were students of Herbert Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse was a student of Engels, Marx's friend. And he was an Austrian Jew who came to America after the Holocaust and became a professor. He was also Angela Davis's professor, by the way. And there were these 4 Ethiopian students whom he fed this Marxism, Leninism philosophy. And then they started attacking Ethiopian culture, whether it is the traditional church culture or the Oromo culture or whatever. They start saying they are primitive. And I used to argue with them because I founded the National Committee for Ethiopian Literacy Campaign, and I was trying to raise money to help educate our people to read and write. And I'm very happy to say General Taddese Birru, who was one of the major generals who was working in Ethiopia, together we were working. And I was being criticized by my friends. Oh, literacy, you're trying to teach people ABC, it will take 100 years for Ethiopia to move forward. So one of my colleagues said, and you? I said, well, we're going to revolutionize Ethiopia. We're going to, the power comes out of the barrel of the gun. And so we will go and turn the tree upside down. So I was frightened already at that time. So I am not, of course, totally pessimistic because a lot of my colleagues are beginning to understand this now. The problem that we have in Ethiopia today is not from the people, because even 95% of the people of Ethiopia and have really, in some ways, even if we look at the church, it teaches Christos Samra 400 years ago. She's called the Mother of Peace. Zara Yacob, he says, Muslims say we are right. Jews say we are right. Christians say we are right. Manu Fatahuitu, who is a judge? So so very critical philosophy. It was regarded as an enlightenment idea, by the way. And if you look at the Oromo culture, it's an ancient culture of Gada culture, where there is extensively respectful, almost democratic culture. So what we need to do today, my Ethiopian friends, to start digging into the rich resources of the history of the church and also the Oromo people and so on, where we have concepts of democracy. Democracy is especially important in the Gada in the Gada culture. And even in the church system, there is some form of democracy. If you read Christos Samra, who one of a great lady, she's called the Mother of Peace. She even says to God, please reconcile yourself to Satan, be an example to us, which is an amazing philosophy. So this is the true idea. And then my great disappointment, of course, is many of my colleagues, friends, dear friends, close friends who've been educated in Europe, in the United States, in Russia, they have absolutely no understanding. Well, I wouldn't say they don't appreciate. They try to appreciate orally the culture of Ethiopia, but they're not practicing it. They don't even understand it. And if they did so, I think we'll be in a good shape. And some younger people, I have a student who actually wrote a book about 5 years ago in Australia. I did his doctorate and I was his reader, Yirga Galau. And he says exactly what I'm saying now. And we are optimistic that maybe our educated people who have been looking into this, what I call the foundations of Marxism, Leninism, and the belief in power comes out of the barrel of the can, that they will look into their own Ethiopian culture and find where we can believe in tolerance, democracy, and working together. Don't let me keep talking. I wish you interrupt me because otherwise.
Okay, I am going to interrupt you because what you're saying is fascinating. And I think it relates also to, in some ways, to the United States and our failure to understand our own history, our own traditions, and to teach civics in school. But we have here with us Nanny, who was educated almost entirely abroad in Canada and the United States from high school on. And I'm wondering, do do you agree with the professor, or do you think that you are steeped in Ethiopian traditions? How would you respond? And yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do agree with Professor, and as an Oromo and having grown up, in a family where the Gada culture of democracy has always been talked about. I mean, I grew up knowing that there is an idea of democracy that existed in Ethiopia, and so when I came to the U.S., I kind of got the other side of democracy, like what does a democracy in the US look like, and then I got to compare it with my country. So I do agree with Professor that I think it's good to learn, about Marx and Hobbes, because as someone who was educated in the classical studies, I did read, Marx and Machiavelli and all these great thinkers that shaped the Western canon and what democracy is in the West. But I also think that we shouldn't take it and run with it, but maybe sit down and analyze, well, how do these ideas play out in our world today? And so I think that the danger of completely accepting an ideology and trying to impose it in a country doesn't really work, because even the idea of democracy is not the same everywhere. What democracy looks like in America is completely different from what it might look like in my country, just because of the different cultures that exist, the different ideas and backgrounds. So I think that we should be more critical of the ideologies or ideas that we accept. And also, I think we should look into our own cultures, because like the professor says, it's not that Ethiopians don't know anything about democracy. In fact, a lot of our cultural aspects are democratic, and as an Oromo, whose people practice democracy in our culture, I know that that idea exists, but it's the question of, well, how do we translate that into our policies, and what does that look like for Ethiopia in general beyond a certain ethnic group? So yeah, I agree with the professor.
Professor, though, I was going to ask you about the world coming to Ethiopia, because it seems to me that happened when the Italians invaded at the beginning of World War II, and then Ethiopia was occupied, and then Ethiopia, the Italians are defeated by the Ethiopians and the British, the Allies in World War II. But this seems to me when the world began to impede or interfere in Ethiopia, and this became particularly true when the Derg took over. The Derg was this communist group of young, idealistic uh, Ethiopians who actually killed the emperor. They smothered him, as we all know, with a pillow. So you're talking about this entry of communism into Ethiopia, but I wonder how important that is today. because communism on the whole is, I would say, maybe naively, is overall discredited. I know China has the communist form of government, but it seems to me the greater problem now is dictatorship, is authoritarian. So if you would, Professor, uh, how do you think the Derg and the entry of the West through Italy into Ethiopia, what was the impact?
I think your question is very important. Indeed, as I said before, the changes in Ethiopia started more or less with this change during the time of the Derg. Uh, at the same time, a lot of the leaders of that organization have now become repentant. In some ways, they've become repentant in realizing that this way of the power comes out of the barrel, or as my sister referred to, Machiavellian philosophy. They become aware of it. However, it is coming up in a different fashion. In other words, the very same people whom I knew who were at one time Marxism, Leninism, are now, of course, aware that that didn't get us anywhere, but yet I think there is a residue of this Marxism Leninism thinking about power, about, you see, what we Ethiopians need to fight against are three big enemies: poverty, disease, and illiteracy. And that's what I've been preaching since the 60s myself, when I founded the Committee for Ethiopian Literacy here in the United States. And we had many very distinguished people like Senator Javits on our board, Governor Rockefeller on our board, and so on. And when we were really preaching that, and nobody would listen to some of us who were preaching that, and people who were trying to say, let's look at our own rich culture and see what we can get out of it. No, we have to throw the baby with the bathwater, meaning every aspect of Ethiopian culture. Now, many of those, my good friends, many of them are my good friends. In fact, 7 of the people who became Politburo members with the Derg were people who worked with me in Boston with the student movement and so on and so forth. I knew them personally. Now, many of them who still survive, many of them, of course, unfortunately perished during the revolution, ate its own children, as you know what happened. However, their philosophy or their Machiavellian idea, which is pre-Marxism, Leninism, still remains. So instead of turning to the cultures of our own people, that I said before, if you look at the Gada culture, the Oromo culture, which is very democratic culture, very tolerant culture, very, what can we get out of that? Or even if the church culture, even the church culture that teaches peace, truth, and love, and I quoted for you Christos Samra, instead of doing that, our former communist Leninist friends have now in some ways become converted to modern democratic ideas, but I don't know if they've washed themselves clean from still this thought of power comes out of the barrel of the gun. And or my own focus is, let's look at the country, the poverty, the disease, and illiteracy. Let's talk about that. And I'm very optimistic, by the way, because I see many Ethiopians who've studied abroad and who are not exactly on that line. They are like right now, very famous Ethiopian doctors, very important Ethiopians who are working with Microsoft, Ethiopians who are working with different companies in this country. And I'm really very, very proud of them. Last week, I read a fascinating story. I don't know, Vicky, if you read about it. It was in the New York Times, quite a long story about an Oromo woman called Agitu Guddata. Did you read about her?
I didn't, but tell us quickly that, and then let's move up to the present, because I want to get to how what is happening now and how the EPRDF influenced what is happening now. But but go ahead with this story. I'm interested to hear.
Ageto Gudeta was an Oromo woman who was a refugee, and she came to Italy and settled in a town which was being abandoned. She rebuilt that town, created a big farm, goat farm, and a special cheese industry. And all Italians became so impressed by this. And only last week, some crazy Ghanaian guy went, he used to work for her, shot her and killed her. And it's a big story in the New York Times from 2 days ago.
So sorry,
It's
Professor.
so sorry.
But
the story of how she succeeded to come by herself and develop this big, in fact, she revived the whole Italian town. And so the Italians loved her. I'm giving her as an example. There are examples of many Ethiopians in the field of medicine, in the field of science. Like I have a friend who is now an advisor for the Buffett Foundation.
Yes, and we had an Ethiopian who was up at Los Alamos, but I'm gonna push you because I'm not gonna let you get by with not bringing us up to date. So you and I were together when I was in Ethiopia, and we both knew Meles Zenawi, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia at that time, and for approximately 13 years. I have to say he was one of the most impressive people I ever met. But he was certainly an imperfect Democrat, some would say an autocrat. He had the interest of people at hand, but to me, he made 3 mistakes. One was the war with Eritrea. Another was perhaps ethnic federalism. And that brings us today because the current leader, Prime Minister Abiy, wants to make Ethiopia into a unitary state. So what, since the genesis of this conflict between Tigray and the Prime Minister come from the fact that Tigray was the area from which Meles was from, and it was the base of the ruling party at the time for over 13 years. What exactly is that conflict, and how do you think it's going to play out? Can Ethiopia become a unitary state?
Okay, thank you very much. I am glad that you brought up the name of Prime Minister Meles, and I'm glad what you said. I also believe he was a great leader, not perfect. No leader is perfect, and I had great respect for him. And sometimes some of my friends don't understand why he was very. I was very close to him, and he was very close to me. He respected me. I respected him, and in fact, although I'm not a person who always in public criticize politicians on the media and so on, in person, I often told him what is not right and what's not wrong. And that is my great admiration for him is he listened. He always, even if I was very critical, saying, why are you doing this? He didn't say, get out of my office. Instead, he said, no, let's talk about this. So he was a great leader. Now, what has happened is, I'm not 100% sure. The issue is a matter of, I know most Ethiopian intellectuals today say one of the mistakes is this ethnic federalism. I'm not so sure that is part of, that is really the crux of the problem. You know why? Because you see, in politics, whether it's monarchy or democracy or plutocracy, whatever it is, it really depends on the form of the covenant into which people enter with great respect. Let me put it this way. If you look at today, we are focusing on this ethnic federalism and accusing each other, yet we're not looking at how some other country from the outside are really generating. Let me just give you an example. If having just one ethnic group of people makes a country the most peaceful, the most advanced country, Somalia would be one. They have one language, one literature, one religion, one culture, yet it has not been possible. On the other hand, if you look at Switzerland, you got the French speakers who has a different culture on the west. You have the German speakers on the east. You have the Italian speakers. It's a very powerful economic country. Even if you look at the United States, we are made up of 50 states. If you look at England, you got England, Wales. The problem with the ethnic federalism was not the ethnic federalism, but the way that constitution was written. For instance, I'm not very sure if there was an article 39, which says, you can break away if you want. It would not have been necessary to add so the thing is, it's not the ethnic federalism per se, because whether you have an ethnic federalism, one tribal group, unless people enter into a covenant of peace and love and working together, it doesn't work. Look at the United States. It is made up of many states. It's a constitution. But so the problem is more the way the constitution was written. It does need to be maybe reevaluated and see what's good in it and what can be improved. So what I'm trying to say is whether we become a completely unitary country, and I'm personally open-minded to everything. I'm not a politician. What I'm interested in is how can we work together to abolish poverty, disease, and illiteracy, whether it is through unitary or federation. I'm happy with it. But however, just putting the blame on the idea of federalism, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not a politician, I'm not 100% sure. But however, I do believe in a country like Ethiopia, where you got many people speaking different languages, we do need to accommodate each other and find a covenant. I call it a covenant, whereby, just like when a man and a woman get married, maybe she's short, maybe is heavy. So they are different. They both cannot be equal height. They cannot be equal weight. So, but they enter into a covenant and become a family. And so, and even if you have a unitary situation with one language, one culture, and so on, I gave you the example of Somalia. There are many other, Israel, like Israel. Many people come from different parts of the world, Europe, America, Africa, Asia. It is a very strong, powerful country. They look different, yet they have a covenant as a people who want to live together in peace, who want to work together, who make advances. And so the problem with our people in Ethiopia is a lot of my young friends, they focus on politics, not the economy, not the development, not the agriculture, not the health. This is where I'm praying to educate young people to listen to us, to see what is best in our country. And then whatever constitution we write, we have to do it more on the basis of mutual respect, on acceptance of each different languages and so on. And then we become a strong people.
Professor, how would you resolve the current conflict? I mean, what you're saying is absolutely right, but you have the federal government, which attacked the rebel, I'll call it rebel for lack of a better word, province of Tigray. You have 55,000 refugees in Sudan. You have neighboring Eritrean armies in that province, and those are enemies because it was the EPRDF that went to war with Eritrea. So what if you could advise the prime minister to get to this covenant you're talking about? How would you tell him to get there?
We need a national dialogue. Everybody's saying that. Internationally, many leading people, including your colleagues, the former ambassadors of Ethiopia, have called for a dialogue. My colleagues, they're calling for a dialogue. What is past is past. As I told you, I may be dodging political questions, but nonetheless, I will say the following. I cannot now raise the people who were killed out of debt. However, the refugees, we need to do something about it immediately. It is immediate. We cannot see babies and women and children and dying, and this is something that has to be taken care of internationally, and Ethiopia has a responsibility to deal with these refugees. In terms of the question of the conflict, we do have, and it's not just me, it's not my view, and I really personally, I'm only interested always in peace and education. there are conflicts going on in different ways in our country. I am in the long range an optimist, but yet right now we are at a very critical situation, and what we need to do is an immediate progress towards a dialogue, a respectful dialogue, whereby we look at what are our problems, how can we resolve them, how can we get together again, how can we make this country, which has so much potential, agricultural, mineral, and so on and so forth, it has also a cultural potential, and how can we get everybody together with mutual respect. And I think you, friends of ours, former ambassadors now, could help us also. And it is my great hope that the government will accept this idea of let us have a respectful dialogue to resolve all the conflicts that exist and come to some kind of consensus, and there will be a rebirth of our democracy or our culture.
I remember, I think at your encouragement, I formed a group of leaders in Ethiopia to start a dialogue, and it was 2020 because it was 2006 at the time, and so now we are at 2020 and no closer. Nanny, what would you do? You're a Romo. Oromos have often demanded independence. How would you build on the professor's idea?
Well, I think that a national dialogue is certainly a place to start. And then what I'm noticing right now, especially, with social media and with, so much anger and tension going on, is that no one is listening to each other. Like Oromos, say, well, we've been oppressed and, we've had human rights abuses. And so we want change, but it's not coming from a place of like, let's sit down and talk about it together peacefully. So I would hope that the first place to start is a dialogue, simply because I don't think that we can ignore the level of the ethnic violence that's going on right now. I mean, every day we hear the news of people killing each other over their differences. And I think that the prime minister is gonna have a huge, I don't know, he's going to have to tackle that. If there is going to be democracy in Ethiopia, I think that there has to be a way for us to have a dialogue about our differences. But I also want to add to the professor's remark about how we need to invest in our young people, especially when it comes to education, jobs, and poverty, because right now we're too busy fighting over our ethnicity, and we're ignoring the fact that Ethiopia is still a very poor country. We still need to be developed economically. There's so many other issues that we're ignoring right now. And I think that in addition to a national dialogue, I do think that we need better policies to shape our economy, and also invest in young people and, create better jobs in order to achieve, the democratic and prosperous nation that we want to see.
Great, Danny. Professor, I'm going to give you the last word, and it's, Ethiopia is this great country, the only country in Africa, if you exclude Liberia, which I don't think really counts, that was never colonized. One of the few countries in the world that was never colonized. An amazing tradition of getting along, as you pointed out, but also of an empire that lasted 2,000 years. So tell us, predict the future a little bit. Where do you think Ethiopia is headed?
I used to call myself an incorrigible optimist. I am no longer incorrigible, but I'm still an optimist, a corrigible one. I think we have important foundations in Ethiopia. As I pointed out, the 5, maybe 10% of our modern educated people who only say, I know it all, I know it all. You must follow what I'm saying. They have to be humble. They have to confess their the sins they've committed against our country, and they have to be very respectful of listening to the village people. I once suggested, in fact, to Prime Minister Meles, if an Ethiopian comes from abroad and says, I want a job, I said, before he gets a job, well, I have a degree, master's, doctorate, whatever, he first should go to a village, live there for 1 month or 3 months, and get a village degree so that they know what the people are like. Because the people of Ethiopia are wonderful people, tolerant people, as I mentioned, whether they're Christians or Oromo or Gurage and so on. They have one, like I tell you, I've traveled throughout Ethiopia when I was a student as an interpreter for my high school teachers who were from Canada. And then I've traveled throughout Ethiopia when I was running the literacy campaign. And then I've traveled throughout Ethiopia when I was, wherever I go to the villages, they don't ask me, are you Amhara or Oromo or Tigray? They ask me, oh, you must have come from a distant place. You must be tired. You must be hungry. Please come in. We'll serve you coffee. It happens in Amhara country, in Tigray country, in Oromo country. So that is the culture of our people. So I am calling upon my educated Ethiopians, please bow humbly in front of the traditional people. Don't pretend that you've been in Oxford and Harvard and everywhere and you know it all. Listen to the wisdom of our village people. My sister also mentioned the Gada people. I actually myself, the other thing I said to the Prime Minister Meles once was, if an Ethiopian comes and says, I'm a pure Ethiopian, he should not get a passport. I said, he has to prove that he is mixed. We are all mixed. Well, I myself, my mother too is Oromo, and my father is a Jew. My brother marries an Amhara. His daughters, Ethiopia is a very wonderful country where people have been so intermarried, tolerant, and so on. And so these Western educated people who come with their dogma, that's they have to get up from the dogma, knowing they know whether it's democratic dogma or Marxism dogma, it doesn't matter. Let's learn from the village people. Let's learn from the Oromo culture, of the Gada culture. Let's learn from the teaching of the churches that teaches peace, love, truth, and so on and so forth. Then it's a big future for Ethiopia. I think if we focus now on admitting we are making mistakes, because the beginning of knowledge is sometimes admitting one's own mistakes. I made mistakes in my life also. And then once you make the mistakes and there is nobody who doesn't make mistakes, then you begin to say, why did I make these mistakes? So I call upon my brothers and sisters of Ethiopia, let's learn from the cultures that exist in our countries, an ancient culture, as you repeat. I'm very proud of Ethiopia. I've written about it, my books about Ethiopian church and Ethiopian culture. You can read them. And let's say, I call upon my educated Ethiopians who are now focusing only on politics, especially whether it's the Marxism or Machiavellianism and so on. Please, for the sake of the hungry, for the sake of the persecuted, for the sake of the refugees, please be humble, confess your sins, confess your, and come together and work out with respect. And let's also look at the few Ethiopians who I mentioned are successful engineers, doctors, lawyers, and so on. Let's listen to them. Many of them, that's part of the problem, are not involved in the politics and they don't really participate. They need to give guidance to the few who are completely inflamed with the power of politics. So let's look forward into our own culture and let's take the best from our culture. Of course, no culture is perfect, and take away what is not, and then look to the future. And we have, I think, a great, bright future. I am an optimist in the end.
And thank you. I mean, that's really inspiring. And obviously, dialogue, respect for each other is exactly what Ethiopia needs. It's also what many countries need, including our own. But I know there are many, many questions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sandy. And again, thank you so much, Professor. As you know, I love Ethiopia. I hope this difficult time for Ethiopia comes to an end, and that indeed we see a successful, prosperous country. Sandy?
Let me echo
No,
that.
many people who work with you love you, and I
Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you.
Well, let me echo that as well. There's a number of questions here that are really kind of divided into two around national dialogue and around some issues around religion. But Nanny, let me throw the first question to you. Talking about national dialogue, let's talk about the voice of your generation, and where does your, I'm not going to say you speak for your generation, but where do folks your age and your perspective, where do you sit within this conflict? What do you think are some of the ingredients necessary to help drive towards a happy resolution?
Well, I mean, I've seen kind of two sides when it comes to my generation. There are people like me who not only want a national dialogue, but who want to address, the rampant hate speech that we see all over social media. But I've also had friends who still very much hold on to like old ideas of like how Ethiopia should be, and also, who have some hatred in them, who say, well, I'm from this ethnic group and that ethnic group has done this thing to me, and so, we're not going to talk about it. So I am kind of worried about that. While I'm optimistic that my generation can be a force for change and perhaps, charter like a new path for my country, I am also worried that there are a lot of young people that, from their parents or grandparents have, held on to these ideas of like, Amharas and Oromos cannot coexist simply because, they did this and that. And so I certainly think that national dialogue is important, but I do hope that us young people are going to be a part of it. As someone who's interested in going back to Ethiopia and getting into public office one day, one area that lacks, in my opinion, is there is a platform for young people like myself to sit at the decision-making table and talk to the people back home about, what we think, because at the end of the day, our generation is going to be charged with solving a lot of Ethiopia's problems. So I think making room for the young people at the decision-making table and, including us in the national dialogue is important.
So Nanny, one more question for you. The Prime Minister Ahmet has taken a lot of heat for being a Nobel Prize winner who's now turning or has turned to weapons to resolve or to attempt to resolve a dispute. If you were sitting in the Prime Minister's office, what would you be whispering into his ear as something he might consider in using or employing in an attempt to resolve this?
Well, I mean, I think one thing he could have done is, he did reject any interference from the African Union, from the UN. A lot of the international community was asking to, for some sort of resolution, and he rejected it. And so perhaps I would advise him that maybe he should have, allowed a dialogue before the conflict escalated. And as for, whether or not he should have went to war, that's a difficult question for me to answer because, I have followed the conflict, and the response he gave was, well, we were trying to negotiate with Tigray for a while and it didn't work, and they attacked our military base, and so it was the last resort. And so, from a national security point of view, I would understand why he had to do what he did, but I also don't think that he understood the level of consequences that would have followed, because with refugees, and right now we don't even know if there were war crimes committed. There are so many questions unresolved. So I do think that if he had allowed the international community in and to have a dialogue, that might have minimized the damage that the conflict has had.
Thank you. Well, let's continue on this issue of the national dialogue. And Dr. Isaac, I'm going to ask this question for you. This is from our audience, from Gide Woldganriel, who I'm going to guess is of Ethiopian origin. And he asks, a national dialogue cannot take place in a vacuum. The United Nations, the United States, and European Union must exert their influence and stop the war and help create access to the displaced. Can you quickly give us an idea of the role the United Nations, US, and the EU should or could or must play in this situation?
Well, let me say there's an Ethiopian proverb. I'll say it in Amharic and try to translate. አፌን በመላሴ መላሴን በአፌ ካላንቆላጳላጠስኩት ማን ያንቆላጳላጥስልኛል? It means if I don't rub my own cheeks with my own tongue, who will do it for me? The first is we have to deal with our problem ourselves. However, we do need our friends to stand by. We do need the United Nations. We do need the European Union, the United States to give support. But what I'm trying to say is, let's say you are married and you have a fight with your wife. Well, you have to solve your problems through maybe the help of elders. But in the long range, it is up to you to solve the problem. What I'm saying is it is the people themselves, and we have our own resources, no question about that. We have our own youth, especially I'm very glad Nani mentioned the youth. The future of Ethiopia is the youth. And what makes me optimistic about the youth is, unlike the youth of my generation, who were baptized in Marxism, Leninism, Machiavellianism, the youth of this generation is actually more or less baptized in studying technology, in internet, and so on and so forth. I think the youth of this generation has not yet gotten to the place where they have to realize, after all, Ethiopia belongs to us. We are the future. And so in this dialogue, we do need, okay, what number one, the people in the country, the religious leaders, Christians, Muslims, Jews, the youth, and everybody has to participate in this dialogue. Of course, we always will need the support of our international friends, the United Nations, the European Union, the United States government. I don't know if I'm clear in what I'm saying. They are like a two-step or a two-part situation where unless we ourselves really can sit down together, the men, the women, the children, and the young, and so on and so forth, the problem will not be resolved. The outsiders are not going to be able to push away the problems. So once we start this dialogue, we need the support of our international friends. Am I clear in what I'm saying?
Well, let's keep going on this issue. We have a great question here from Stefan Gompertz, who I'm told is the former French ambassador to Ethiopia. Welcome to the program.
Friend of mine.
And he asks, how can leaders, be they in government or in opposition groups, accept a national dialogue without appearing to lose face?
There is something that since ancient times has looked at as a very important spiritual pillar, humility. It's called humility. I think Ambassador Gompertz, thank you very much. I think he's 100% right. In fact, what we're suffering today, one of the disease from which we're suffering is arrogance. Arrogance, pride. It's very difficult for people to say, I am wrong. But you know, I'll tell you, it is more liberating sometimes to say, I am sorry, I'm mistaken, instead of saying, I know it all, I am right. How to do this? It's not easy. It's easy said than, but what I like to see is for our educated, powerful politicians to close their eyes, and look at the poverty, the disease, the illiteracy from which millions of our people are suffering. That is worse than their own pride, their ego. You know, Freud and Einstein once corresponded about the problem of human, and this is not, by the way, an Ethiopian problem. It's an international problem, where Freud was trying to explain to Einstein that we really have a problem with the human ego. The ego, whatever he called the instinct of whatever power, the instinct of what, and then he tried to say, Freud, to Einstein, let's try to work together. He said, although I'm a pessimist, you, Einstein, you're an optimist, let's work together. So I am personally an optimist. And I don't know how to make my friends who believe that I am right and they're afraid of losing face they're afraid of dropping their pride. But I appeal to them by saying, what about the millions and millions of people, the babies who are dying? Is pride more important than the babies who are dying? Is your ego more important than the hungry millions of our people? For their sake, please fall on the floor. It's part of our culture. Fall on the floor, confess your mistakes and your arrogance. It's easier said than done. But I only have to appeal to our people who don't want to lose face or whatever, what Ambassador Comper said, for the sake of the hungry, for the sake of the poor, for the sake of the sick, the persecuted, the refugees and the prisoners, and for the sake of all the others who are suffering. Who am I? I'm one person, my ego. Just because I studied at Harvard, I am more important than the village person. I have the same mouth, the same stomach, the same heart, the same lungs, and so on. This disease, if it comes, what's it called, COVID, it's not going to say, oh, you're so proud of yourself and you're trying to save your face. I'm not going to catch you. No, it will catch you as well as it will catch the village person. We have to realize we are all human. Huh? But
and a little humility would go an awfully, awfully long way. I mean, what you're saying seems like a classic recipe for peace in any country around the world. In this country, would certainly go a long way too. Nanny, let me ask you a quick question, and I'm actually going to ask the same question of you, Dr. Isaac, as well. Is Ethiopia suffering from the same sort of sense of identity politics that plague the United States, that plague parts of Europe, that certainly have plagued, Ethiopia's neighbors? I'm thinking of Kenya, for example, where identity or tribal politics have really risen to the fore and ruptured a lot of the political process in that country. Tell us a little bit about identity politics in Ethiopia, Nanny, and then I'll ask the same question of you, Dr. Isaac.
Yeah, I mean, that's a definite yes. I think that is what we suffer from. And I mean, I noticed it first back in 2016. I was back in Addis to get my identity card. It's like a small card that you have, just like a state card in the US. And, the guy asked me what ethnic group I belong to. And I was shocked because that was the first time anyone had asked me what ethnic group I belong to, and I respond, I'm Ethiopian. But of course, since 2016, that regulation has changed. But, of course, fast forward to 2018, when we had a wave of protests that ended up bringing Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed into power. I mean, those protests were largely led by Oromos, but there was a lot of question about identity. Different ethnic groups were saying that they weren't being served right. They didn't, feel like they were Ethiopian. And so all of a sudden, people started referring to themselves based on their ethnic groups and not Ethiopian. You'd speak to even some, Oromos in my family. I'd speak to them and they would tell me, I'm not Ethiopian, I'm Oromo, and that's how I identify as. And so that got, gradually worse, especially with, social media. And once the prime minister, of course, came to power, he opened up social media and a bunch of media outlets that were blocked. And all of a sudden you could see waves and waves of posts about people identifying with their ethnic group, but also kind of saying, ostracizing other ethnic groups and promoting hate speech. So I certainly think that one of the main problems I see in our country right now is this identity politics that's based on ethnicity, and one group saying, well, I'm not going to listen to the other group because X, Y, and Z has happened to me, and I'm going to blame the other group for it. And of course, with the result of that, we're seeing, so much violence and people dying every day. And so it's certainly a big concern for me. And I don't know what the plan is from the prime minister's side or from the Ethiopian government to address it, but they have to. And especially now that social media is where people go for their news and, what happens every day. I worry that the role that social media is playing is harmful. And I don't know what mitigating that will look like, because you can't block it, because then of course you are going to be kind of blocking people's freedom of speech. But at the same time, you can't also just let it go on, because as we've seen, people are going to die. So yes, I mean, I think we do have an issue with identity politics, and it's something we have to do something about it. But honestly, I don't know what that looks like, because there's so many factors that go into that.
Dr. Isaac, same question to you around identity politics and maybe a way forward.
Well, let me put it this way. I am personally for the riches of identities. I don't want to live in a world in which all the flowers are white or red or black. I love the beauties of red flower, yellow flower. Therefore, I do believe that differences of language or culture enrich the world. I studied some 17 languages. I'll be bored if I don't have time to study other languages. I'll be bored if I only look at a person who is only short, or if a person is only white. I love that we are different. For me, difference, the problem is not that. The problem is saying, I am better. If the red flower says, I am better than the blue flower, don't sit with me, that's where the problem is. And this is not only a problem between groups of people. Even within a family, I can tell you, I know people in New York who's fighting with each other, the same family, brothers and brothers, daughters with parents. So it's a matter of how to accept each other. If the red flower accepts the blue flower, the yellow flower, and say, we're wonderful. Therefore, in fact, I don't want to live in a world in which we are all speaking one language, we're all the same height, the same color, and so on. I love the differences. Look, here I live, some flowers are some beautiful pictures of different colors. Therefore, the problem is, however, self-acceptance. It's not so much this identity issue, self-acceptance, saying, I am proud of who I am, but I also respect yours. Now, many people, unfortunately, say, I am proud of myself and you have to be like me. You have to talk the way I talk, you have to do, that's a problem. Instead of saying, like when I was a little kid, there were people from Western Ethiopia, they were called Nuer people. They used to come to the marketplace, they were tall, and we were children, and they were talking a different language. And we used to run after them. I'm so happy to listen. We thought we were listening to music. Their language for me was very interesting. They were talking. So I don't want to be like you, but I like to accept you. It's just, again, husband and wife too, like you are different, but you live together. So self-acceptance, or what you called identity politics, that's not really, you see, anything can be made into a problem. Even if brothers and brothers can fight, sisters and sisters can fight. Therefore, the fact that we have different languages, different cultures, makes me very proud, very happy. And I like every Ethiopian to learn the different languages and cultures and other. That is where we'll solve our problem. Not to say we are all one color, we are all one language, we are all one thing, but to say, I learn your language, you learn my language, give and take, give and take. This is a tall order. I understand what I'm saying is a little maybe philosophical. My first study is philosophy. However, it is possible. It is, look at Israel, Jews from Yemen identify as Yemeni Jews. Jews from Morocco identify as Morocco. But they accept each other and they respect each other. They live with each other. They work with each other. They have factories together and so on. So we need to, and this requires education. The root, I always believe that education is the key to everything. To educate, especially young people, our younger people. The future of Ethiopia is the young people. And to teach our young people to appreciate, like I myself speak the Oromo language. I love the language, it's beautiful. And I speak also the Giz language, the ancient Ethiopian language. But let me tell you this, 10,000 years ago, they were both one language. We need to learn that. Education will help us. Education will tell us the languages we speak today in Ethiopia, Amharic, Tigray, Gurage, or Goba, Giz, and so on, and Oromo, and so on. 10,000 years ago were one language. I happen to publish a Journal of Afro-Asiatic Languages here in Princeton, and you can read about these are linguistic studies. In other words, we have really the same deep roots. We are really, we have much more in common. And for that, education, we need to educate the young people to learn the culture, to respect others, and also even religion. And the religious leaders could play a role, whether they are Christians, Muslims, Bagadas, and Jews. They need to also play a very important role of teaching their own people humility, of teaching them the respect of others and the love of your neighbor. These are principles on which all religions are founded. So identity, I'm proud of my identity. Let me tell you this. I don't want to be you. I love you, and you look beautiful. When I look at you, Sandy, you look like a nice person with a very nice beard. I'm glad I can look at you because I've seen myself in the mirror, and I'll be bored if I keep looking at myself. So what we need to do is education, to educate the people. And I think the religious community can play a role in educating people, the educational system also, by teaching people how accepting differences enrich our life, and not try to make everybody like me, not make everybody thin. I'm very thin, so that all. I don't know if what I'm focusing on is education of the younger people to learn, number one, to respect yourself, to respect your own group, whether you're Oromo, Amhara, or Tigray. That's important. Number two, then how to respect the others, how to give and take. So the differences are not a problem. In many countries, even in France too, they have many people of different culture. They live together. But Israel, as I said, is a good, America, the United States. Look, my neighbor here is Italian. The other people on the other side, they claim to be of German origin. But this is the United States. So the Italian is not trying to convert the German to be a German or Italian. So, but the United States is united. What we need to do is to be united, to accept, to learn. And that requires really education from childhood. So we need to work on that, educating our children how to respect their own culture, whatever language they speak, if it's Oromo, Oromifa, or Amharic, or Tigray, and then to also try to learn the languages of other people. I try to learn to speak many of the Ethiopian languages. It's not easy, but I love it. It enriches my life. It makes me happy, even if I know a few words.
Almost a ganalo for that. You see, I tried to learn some. let me dare to summarize a couple of things, because I think your wisdom just is extraordinary. So we need to learn how to listen to each other. We need to create spaces where we can listen and we can talk. We need to listen to the wisdom of the people. We need to follow multiple lines of inquiry. We need to focus on poverty, but we also have to, and I couldn't agree more, it's our cardinal duty to educate not only our young folks, but also ourselves. And I think that joins many of us here on this webinar today. We all believe in the role of education, not only as something to give, but as something to receive, as being just incredibly essential. And building on a comment here from Felipe Klessig, we have to continually admit our own errors. We have to be humble and full of humility as we approach problems, which in 2021 just get more complex and more rich and have more context around them. And so the smarter we can be about them, the more we can listen about them, I think ideally the better we'll come to solve those. So that's my very rough attempt to summarize, but I want to thank both of you so much, well, all three of you so much for a great conversation. Ethiopia is indeed one of my very favorite places in the world. It's an extraordinary place, extraordinary people. So thank you so much for sharing your great insights today. We're deeply appreciative. Dr. Isaac, thank you so much. And Nanny, thank you so much. And Vicki, of course, thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank
What
you.
a wonderful way to start the year, because despite the conflicts in Ethiopia and in the United States and around the world, we've we've heard from youth, and that makes us feel good, but particularly we've heard your inspiring words, Dr. Ephraim and Isaac. And it's wonderful to be your friend
Thank you.
and to hear from you.
Thank
And I look forward to
I'm hugging
continuing
you.
to work with Ethiopia.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you all so very, very, very much. And I ask apology from everyone who listened to me. If I said something that I offended you, please forgive me. Forgive
I
me.
love it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so
Thank you
much.
so
Thank you for
Thank you,
taking
Nani.
the time.
Thank you, Andy. And Vicky, we'll keep in touch.
Yes, we will.
Merci,
Thank
merci
you.
beaucoup, Ambassador Stefan.
Thank you so much,
Really, this is,
everyone.
thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate, and I know it's easy to talk, but difficult to analyze. But so forgive me if I talk too much.
Well, we have to do that dialogue, and fortunately, Ambassador Gompez
Thank
was
you.
on our video, so we'll look for him to help us do it
I did
with
actually
you.
send the email to all the ambassadors that you will be on this line tonight.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Okay.
thank you so much. It's been
Thank
great.
you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And
Really
we'll see
wonderful
you all
opportunity.
next week. Thank you, everyone.
Nice to meet you, Nani. Nagati tayo. Kalatomi.
Fayata, bye.
Fayata. Walargina.
I'll email you.
Wonderful.
Please. Okay.
All right, bye.
Bye, everyone.
Au revoir. Au revoir.
Au revoir.